The pot roast had been in the oven since 7 that morning. I remember standing at the kitchen counter at 4 in the afternoon, lifting the lid just enough to let the steam escape, breathing in the smell of garlic and rosemary and the particular kind of comfort that only comes from a meal you've made 100 times before. The kind of meal that means home. The kind that says you matter enough for me to start cooking before the sun was fully up. I was wearing my navy dress, the one with the tiny pearl buttons down the front. I'd bought it 3 weeks earlier, specifically for today, my 65th birthday, because I wanted to look like the kind of woman who still made an effort, who still had somewhere to be and someone to be there for. The dining room table was set for 8. I'd used the good china, the white ivory set with the gold rim that Harold and I received as a wedding gift 41 years ago, and that I normally only brought out for Thanksgiving and Christmas. I'd pressed the white linen tablecloth with an actual iron, the old one with the steam function that takes 10 minutes to heat up properly. I'd arranged yellow tulips in the crystal vase at the center. Tulips because Nathan, my son, used to bring me wildflowers from the backyard when he was small, and they were almost always yellow. He said yellow was the happiest color. There were place cards written in my best handwriting. Nathan, Vivian, Cooper, who had just turned 7 and currently believed he could become either a professional soccer player or a marine biologist, depending on the day. Lily, 5 years old, who had recently decided her stuffed rabbit needed its own chair at every meal. Ruth and Earl, my sister and her husband, and myself at the head of the table where I could see everyone's faces. I had sent reminder texts to everyone 2 days before. Nathan had responded with a cake emoji and "See you Saturday, Mom." Ruth had replied, "Wouldn't miss it, Dot. Want me to bring that potato salad you like?" Even Vivian had responded, a simple "We'll be there," which was more than I sometimes got. I had no reason to expect anything other than a full table. By 6:30, the candles I'd lit at 6 were burning down to soft stumps. I checked my phone for the 3rd time. Nothing. I told myself what anyone tells themselves in that first hour of waiting. Traffic, maybe. A last-minute thing with the kids. Cooper probably had one of his asthma episodes and they got delayed at the pharmacy. These things happen. They happen to everyone. I walked back to the kitchen and turned the oven down to warm. I straightened the place cards that didn't need straightening. I stood at the window and watched a neighbor's dog trot across the lawn across the street, its owner scrolling his phone without looking up, and I thought, that's fine. People run late. It's fine. At 7, I called Nathan, straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Nathan Calloway. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." His voice on that recording, cheerful, a little rushed, made my chest tighten in a way I wasn't prepared for. I left a message so carefully casual that I've never forgiven myself for it. "Hey, sweetheart. Just checking in. Dinner's staying warm. No rush. Just let me know your ETA. Love you." I called Vivian next. Same thing. Voicemail. Then Ruth. Ruth, who has answered her phone on the 2nd ring for as long as I can remember. Ruth, who once called me back within 4 minutes while she was in the middle of a dental appointment because she saw my name on the screen and thought something might be wrong. Her phone rang 7 times and went to voicemail. I sat down at the dining room table. In my chair, at the head, where I would have been able to see everyone's faces. I looked at the empty seats instead. The pressed linen. The good china. The yellow tulips already starting to droop slightly at the edges, the way cut flowers do when the room is warm. 8 o'clock came and went. I knew by then, in the way you know things you don't want to know, a knowledge that lives below the stomach, below rational thought, that they weren't coming. But I couldn't make myself move. I just sat there in my navy dress with the pearl buttons, at the head of a table set for 8, in a house so quiet I could hear the refrigerator hum from 2 rooms away. It was the quiet that did it. That particular kind of silence that isn't peaceful. It's hollow. Like the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do. What I did, which I have regretted every day since, was pick up my phone and open Facebook. Vivian's post was at the top of my feed. She was wearing a white sundress, the flowing kind, the kind you wear on a boat deck with the wind in your hair. Her arm was around Nathan, who was grinning in a way I hadn't seen in months, fully, completely, like a man without anything weighing on him. Behind them stretched the Gulf of Mexico, blue and enormous and indifferent. Living our best life on the Gulf Coast. So grateful for this amazing family. I scrolled down with a hand that had gone completely numb. Cooper and Lily building sandcastles on white sand, Cooper's tongue between his teeth the way it gets when he's concentrating. Nathan helping Lily with the turrets, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. Ruth and Earl at what looked like a ship's bar, Earl raising his glass toward the camera, Ruth's head thrown back mid-laugh. Everyone was there. Everyone I had set a place for. Everyone I had pressed a tablecloth for and bought yellow tulips for and started cooking for at 7 in the morning. The timestamp said the photos were posted 47 minutes ago. 47 minutes ago, while I was sitting at my table waiting, they were on a boat somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, toasting with champagne, building sandcastles, throwing their heads back laughing at things I would never know about. I set my phone face down on the table very carefully, as though it were something fragile, something that might shatter if I wasn't gentle with it. Then I sat with what I felt for a long time without trying to name it. It wasn't quite anger. Not yet. It was more like the feeling you get when you step on ice you thought was solid and hear it crack beneath you. That split second between the sound and the fall, when you understand what's happening but haven't yet accepted where you're going. She planned this. The thought arrived quietly, without drama, the way the most important truths always do. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a last-minute deal Vivian stumbled upon. She chose this date. She chose my birthday. My phone buzzed. Nathan's name lit up the screen. I stared at it for a full 5 seconds before I read the message. Sorry, Mom. Forgot to mention we'd be away this week. Vivian booked a surprise trip. Happy birthday, though. Forgot to mention. As though a Gulf Coast cruise were the kind of thing that slipped your mind. As though booking a family vacation on your mother's 65th birthday were the sort of coincidence that required no explanation beyond a cake emoji and a belated text message. I put the phone down, stood up, walked to the kitchen in my navy dress and began putting things away. I wrapped the chocolate cake I'd spent all morning making. I covered the pot roast and moved it to the back of the refrigerator. I blew out what remained of the candles and carried the good china to the sink. Each plate made a small, sharp sound against the others that seemed too loud in the quiet house. I did not cry. I was surprised by that later. I thought I would cry. Instead, I caught my reflection in the dark window above the sink. A woman in a navy dress with pearl buttons, alone in her kitchen, putting away a birthday dinner no one came to eat. And I thought, she looks smaller than I remember. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on top of the covers in the dark, still in the dress because I couldn't quite make myself take it off, and I let myself remember, really remember, not the softened, charitable versions of events I'd been carrying around for years, the ones where there was always a reasonable explanation and good intentions underneath, the real versions. Cooper's 4th birthday party. I'd been so excited. I'd bought him a remote control boat, the kind with the little remote that actually steers. I'd wrapped it in paper covered in tiny anchors because at 4, Cooper was in his boat phase, obsessed with anything that floated. I arrived at the venue, a little party room at the Children's Museum, with the anchor paper present tucked under my arm. Vivian met me at the door, that particular smile she wore. I know it so well now, the one that starts with her eyes slightly lowered, full of apologetic warmth, the one she perfects for delivering disappointing news, was already in place when I came up the steps. Oh, Dorothy, didn't Nathan tell you? We had to move the party to tomorrow. Little emergency with the venue. Booking conflict. So sorry you came all this way. But I could hear children laughing behind the door. I could see the string of balloon letters through the window. Happy birthday, Cooper, blue and white. When I called Nathan from my car, he was genuinely confused. Tomorrow? No, Mom, the party's today. Is everything okay? When he mentioned it to Vivian, she'd been so sweetly apologetic. Oh gosh, I must have given Dorothy the wrong information. I'm so sorry I've been so scattered this week. She'd sent me a text that evening. So sorry about the mix-up, Dorothy. Hope you can still make it to the next one. With 3 little pink heart emojis. I had told myself, miscommunication. She's a busy mother. These things happen. Lily's first day of kindergarten. I had asked Vivian 3 times about drop-off. 3 separate conversations over 2 weeks, because I wanted to be there with my camera. I wanted to see Lily's face when she walked through those school doors for the first time. Oh, they're doing it really early this year, Vivian had said. Like 7 a.m.? Probably too much of a hassle for you to drive all the way over there at that hour. I drove over at 6:45. I stood outside Jefferson Elementary School in the early September morning, watching other grandmothers with their cameras and their proud, wet eyes, and waited. The teacher told me, cheerfully, that Lily had already been inside since 8:30. Regular drop-off time. Same as every year. The Christmas that wasn't. Vivian had called 2 days before Christmas, voice pitched at exactly the right frequency of reluctant honesty. Dorothy, I hate to do this, but Nathan's been so overwhelmed with work stress lately. He asked if we could keep the holiday really small this year. Just immediate family. I hope you understand. I understood. I spent Christmas Day reheating leftovers and watching a movie I'd already seen twice, and I told myself that Nathan's stress was real, that this was what families did. They protected each other. They scaled back when someone was struggling. I made a mental note to check in on him more. 2 weeks later, Ruth mentioned the photos she'd seen on Instagram. 20 people. Nathan's college friends, neighbors from their street, Vivian's gym friends. A whole house full of noise and celebration and Christmas lights. Everyone except me. I got up when the sky started to go gray, made coffee I didn't taste, and sat down at the kitchen table with my phone. I started scrolling through Vivian's social media the way you read evidence once you know what you're looking for. Not casually, the way I had before. With purpose. There she was at Cooper's school play, the one she'd told me was canceled due to a flu outbreak. Front row. Nathan's arm around her shoulders. There she was at Lily's dance recital, the one described to me as just a practice session, nothing formal. The auditorium behind her was full. Photo after photo, gathering after gathering, milestone after milestone. The images stretched back 2 years, 3 years, further. In all of them, Vivian stood at the center, Nathan beside her, the children clustered close. Everyone smiling, everyone belonging. I counted the events I'd been present for versus the ones I'd been told about after the fact, or told incorrectly about, or simply never informed of at all. The ratio was not what a person would expect from honest mistakes and ordinary miscommunication. The ratio was what you'd expect from a pattern. This is not forgetfulness. The thought settled into my chest like a stone dropping into still water. This is architecture. She built this. I thought about the way Vivian spoke about me at family gatherings. Always warm, always with that practiced look of gentle concern. Nathan, your mom seems tired lately. Maybe we shouldn't burden her with the kids this weekend. I ran into Dorothy at the grocery store. She seemed a little confused about something. Is she doing okay on her own? Small sentences, small implications, each one a brick. She had been building a wall between me and my son, one polite sentence at a time, for 7 years. And she'd done it so carefully, so gradually, that by the time I was standing outside a birthday party I hadn't been allowed to attend, Nathan was genuinely puzzled about why I'd shown up on the wrong day. Because she had told him I was confused, that I mixed things up, that I needed managing rather than including. And Nathan, my honest, open-hearted, trusting Nathan, who had never once in his life learned to be suspicious of people who claimed to love him, had believed her. Because why wouldn't he? She was his wife. She was warm and organized and always seemed to have everyone's best interests in mind. He hadn't seen it. I understood that, sitting there in my kitchen in the gray early morning. He hadn't seen it because he was inside it. Because when you are the person being slowly turned, you don't feel the turning. You only feel the new direction you're facing. My phone rang. Nathan's name. I picked up. Mom, happy belated birthday. His voice was bright, a little windblown, the particular relaxed tone of a man on vacation. Sorry we missed it. This trip has been incredible. Vivian really outdid herself with the planning. You would have loved seeing the kids on the beach. I gripped the phone. I saw the photos, I said carefully. Oh good, she's been posting constantly. Cooper learned to swim, like actually swim, not just splash around. And Lily made this little friend from Nashville. They were inseparable the whole last day. Nathan, I stopped. How long ago did you book this trip? A pause, barely a beat, but I heard it. I mean, Vivian found the deal. You know how she is. She just goes for things when the timing's right. Spontaneous, that's one of the things I love about her. Spontaneous. The word landed in my stomach like something cold. Of course, I said. Get some rest, sweetheart. After I hung up, I sat for a long time looking out at the garden. The flower beds I'd planted the summer Nathan was 9 years old. The summer Harold taught him to use the little trowel. The summer Nathan's hands were still small enough that the garden gloves fell off his fingers. I had tended those beds for 26 years. Tulips in the spring, black-eyed Susans through July, chrysanthemums in the fall. Harold used to say the garden was my way of insisting that beautiful things were worth the effort. He wasn't wrong. I thought about what Vivian had built, the careful, patient architecture of my erasure, and I thought about what I'd spent 65 years building: a son, a family, a place at a table that belonged to me, that I had earned not through blood alone but through 38 years of showing up, remembering, trying, loving without condition or agenda. She thought she could make me invisible. She had been working toward that goal with remarkable dedication, and she was, if I was being honest, quite good at it. But she had made one critical error. She had assumed I would accept it. I looked out at the chrysanthemums coming up along the fence, right on schedule, exactly where I'd planted them. Beautiful things are worth the effort, Harold used to say. I finished my coffee and went upstairs to change out of the navy dress. I had work to do. 7 days after my 65th birthday, on a Tuesday morning that smelled like rain, the doorbell rang. I was still in my robe. It was 10 past 10 on a Tuesday morning, and I was sitting at the kitchen table with my second cup of coffee and a stack of thank you cards I'd bought 3 weeks earlier for a celebration that never happened. I hadn't been able to throw them away. I'm not sure why. Maybe because throwing them away meant accepting something I wasn't quite ready to put into words yet. The doorbell rang, and I startled badly enough to slosh coffee onto the table. I wasn't expecting anyone. Since Harold died 8 years ago, unexpected visitors had become rare in my life. The kind of rarity you don't notice accumulating until one day you realize the last person who showed up at your door unannounced was the postal carrier with a package that needed a signature. I lived quietly. I had my routines, my garden, my Tuesday morning calls with my friend Margaret from my teaching days, my library volunteer shift on Thursdays. My life was orderly and small, and, if I was honest with myself in the way the sleepless nights had been forcing me to be lately, lonelier than I had ever admitted to anyone. I looked through the peephole. A man I didn't recognize stood on my front porch. Mid-40s, I guessed. Dark hair with threads of gray at the temples, the kind that comes early from stress rather than age. He was well-dressed, dark coat, collared shirt, but rumpled in the way of someone who has been traveling or who hasn't been sleeping, or both. His hands were shoved deep in his coat pockets, and he kept glancing toward the street and then back at my door, the way people do when they're not entirely sure they should be where they are. There was something in his posture, a heaviness, a kind of gathered courage, that made me pause with my hand on the chain. I almost didn't answer. After the week I'd had, I had very little left for strangers. But something about the way he stood there, like a man steeling himself to say something difficult, made me curious in spite of myself. "Can I help you?" I called through the door. He straightened slightly at the sound of my voice. "Mrs. Calloway?" Careful, hesitant. "Dorothy Calloway. Nathan's mother?" My hand tightened on the chain. How does this man know my son's name? "Who's asking?" He was quiet for a moment. The rain smell was getting stronger through the gap in the door, that particular October heaviness that means the sky has made up its mind. Then he said something that turned the air in my lungs to ice. "My name is Daniel Stafford. I need to talk to you about Vivian." I opened the door to the chain length and looked at him properly. Up close, the worry lines around his eyes were deeper than I'd noticed through the peephole. There were dark half-moons beneath them, the kind that take more than one bad night to earn. His hands, when he drew one out of his pocket to show me it was empty, a small instinctive gesture of harmlessness, were trembling slightly. "What about Vivian?" I said. He met my eyes. Whatever he saw there, a 65-year-old woman in a robe who had not slept properly in a week and had run entirely out of patience for careful phrasing, seemed to make him decide to skip whatever gentler version he'd prepared. "I think," he said, "my son might be living in your son's house." The chain suddenly felt very heavy in my hand. "What are you talking about?" "A little boy." His voice dropped. 7 years old. Brown hair, tends to tilt his head to the right when he's concentrating on something. Has a small scar on his chin. I stopped breathing. Cooper had a scar on his chin, a pale crescent, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. He'd gotten it at age 4, falling off the bicycle with the training wheels in Nathan's driveway. Nathan had called me from the emergency room, voice tight with that particular first-time parent terror. 3 stitches, Mom." He was so brave. He didn't even cry until they brought out the needle. "How do you know about the scar?" I asked. Daniel Stafford looked at me steadily. "Because I've been watching him. From a distance." He paused. "I know how that sounds. I need you to let me explain. I looked at this man, his trembling hands, his sleepless eyes, the way he was holding himself like someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time. And I made a decision. I unlatched the chain and opened the door. "You better come in," I said. He sat on the edge of my sofa like a man who wasn't sure he'd be allowed to stay. I offered coffee. He shook his head, hands clasped in his lap, knuckles white. I sat across from him in Harold's old armchair and waited. "Vivian and I were together for 2 years, he began. His voice was measured, like he'd rehearsed this, but the emotion underneath kept pressing through at the edges. "This was before she met your son. Before any of this. We lived together in Austin. I thought we were building something real. And then she got pregnant." I set my coffee cup down carefully. "I was so happy," he continued. "I wanted to marry her immediately, start planning, but she kept putting me off. Said she needed time, wasn't ready for such a big commitment." He pressed his lips together briefly. "Then one day I came home from work and she was gone. All her things, every trace of her, like she had never lived there at all. Did you look for her?" "For months." The rawness in those 2 words was not performed. "Filed a missing persons report. Hired a private investigator. Posted everywhere I could think of. Nothing." He exhaled slowly. "The investigator finally sat me down and told me, 'Some people don't want to be found.' He said I should accept it and move on." "But you didn't." "I tried." He looked at his hands. "For 7 years I tried. And then 3 months ago I was at a conference in Houston, walking through a park during a lunch break, and I saw them." He stopped, gathered himself. "Vivian, and a little boy who looked exactly like me at that age." His voice, for just a moment, came apart entirely, and then was carefully reassembled. Same eyes, same jaw, same way of tilting his head when something caught his attention. I stood there on a park path and I watched that little boy for 3 city blocks, and I knew. He looked up at me. "Mrs. Calloway, I knew the way you know your own reflection." The room had gone very still around me. "When Vivian left me," he said quietly, "she was approximately 2 months pregnant. If she carried the pregnancy to term, the child would be exactly Cooper's age." I heard myself ask, from somewhere that felt very far away, "You're saying Cooper is your son?" "I'm saying I believe he is. Yes." He reached into his coat and withdrew his phone, turned it to show me a photograph, a school picture by the look of it, the kind with the mottled blue background. A boy of about 6 or 7, dark-eyed, serious-faced, with a slight gap between his front teeth. The resemblance to Cooper was not subtle. It was not the kind of thing you could talk yourself out of with coincidence and wishful thinking. It was the kind of resemblance that sits in your chest like a key turning in a lock you didn't know was there. "I need some air," I said, and didn't move. Daniel reached into his coat again and placed a manila folder on my coffee table. "Before we get to what's in there," he said, "I need to tell you the rest of it, because the DNA results are only part of what I found." He opened the folder and removed several pages, photographs, documents, what looked like copied records. He laid them out with the careful deliberateness of a man who had looked at these papers many times and knew exactly what each one meant. "Vivian's real name is Victoria Draper." I stared at him. "She's 34 years old, not 31 as she told your son. She grew up in the foster care system and aged out at 18 with no family connections, no roots anywhere." He slid a photograph toward me, a high school yearbook photo. The face was unmistakably Vivian's, but younger, harder, something in the eyes that I had never seen in the woman my son had married. A desperate, hungry quality, like someone pressing their face against a window looking in at warmth they couldn't reach. "She's been married twice before," Daniel continued. "Once to a man named Robert Ashford in Nevada, once to a man named Gregory Walsh in Oregon. Both marriages ended in divorce within 2 years. Both times she received substantial alimony settlements." I picked up the photograph with hands that had gone steady in the way hands sometimes go steady when the shock is large enough. I looked at the girl in the yearbook photo, Victoria Draper, 15 years old, eyes full of that hungry, pressing want. And I thought about the woman who had been systematically removing me from my family's life for 7 years, and I understood something for the first time. Vivian hadn't done this because she was cruel. She had done this because she was afraid. Because somewhere underneath all that careful performance, The flowing sundresses and the practiced smiles and the perfectly calibrated expressions of concern was a girl who had grown up with nothing and no one, and who had decided very early that the only way to hold on to anything was to control it completely. That understanding did not make me forgive her, but it made her real to me in a way she hadn't been before. Not a monster, something more complicated and in its way more frightening. The investigator I hired, Daniel said, found 2 other men who had relationships with her that ended the same way. Suddenly, completely, no explanation. He paused. One of them believes she may have been pregnant when she left him as well. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Why not go through the courts directly? Demand a paternity test legally? Pursue custody? Because I saw the cruise photos. I looked up at him. I've been monitoring her social media since Houston, trying to decide what to do. His voice was careful now, deliberate. I looked through 3 years of her posts, Mrs. Calloway. Hundreds of photos, family gatherings, birthday parties, holidays, every milestone those children have had. He held my gaze. Cooper is in all of them. Lily is in all of them. Nathan is in most of them. He paused. You are barely in any of them. The truth of it struck me somewhere below the rib cage. A dull physical impact, like stepping off a curb you didn't see. I recognized what she was doing, Daniel said quietly, because she did it to me first. Toward the end of our relationship, she started pulling me away from my friends, my family, making me feel like I was the problem, like I was too demanding, too much. She convinced me that the people who cared about me didn't really understand what we had together. A pause. She's doing the same thing to Nathan, and she's been doing it to you. She needed me out of the picture, I said slowly. The words felt strange in my mouth, too large, the kind of sentence you say and then sit with because you can't quite believe you're the person saying it. You're a witness to the timeline, Daniel said. You remember when Nathan met her, when they got engaged, when Cooper was born. If you ever started asking questions, comparing dates, thinking about the numbers, you might have figured out the truth. He leaned forward slightly. She needed you to become irrelevant before you became dangerous. I stood up. I needed to move. I walked to the window that looks out over my garden, the flower beds Harold and Nathan and I planted together when Nathan was 9 years old, and I looked at the chrysanthemums coming up along the fence, right on schedule, and I thought about Cooper. Cooper, who had run to me with his arms out when he was small. Cooper, who used to fall asleep on my shoulder during long car rides and drool on my coat and wake up embarrassed and delighted at the same time. Cooper, who had in recent months started looking to Vivian for permission before he spoke to me, a habit so subtle I had told myself it was just growing up, just the natural pulling away of a boy becoming himself. It was not growing up, it was conditioning. She had been teaching him, gently and persistently, that I was someone whose attention required management rather than someone who simply loved him. What about Lily? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I expected. As far as the investigator can determine, Lily is Nathan's biological daughter. Daniel hesitated. But Mrs. Calloway, her birth may have been calculated as well. If Vivian could give Nathan a biological child, he would be far less likely to ever question whether Cooper was his. One child who looks like him makes the other child's differences easy to overlook. I closed my eyes. Lily, small, careful Lily with Nathan's exact shade of gray eyes, used as a guarantee, an insurance policy on a 7-year lie. She used both of them, I said. She used both children. Yes. I turned away from the window. The manila envelope, I said. The DNA results. Daniel stood. He picked up the envelope from the coffee table and held it out to me. His hands were steadier now than they'd been when he arrived, and I understood why. He had been carrying this alone for 3 months, and there is a particular relief that comes from finally putting something heavy down in front of someone else and saying, "Look at this. This is real. I didn't imagine it." "Before you open it," he said, "I need you to know something. I don't want to take Cooper away from Nathan. That little boy has known one father his entire life, and I will not be the person who traumatizes him in the name of my own rights." His voice was very quiet and very certain. But I cannot stand by and watch Vivian continue to manipulate the people who love him, including you, especially you. What are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to help me protect our family. He said the word without hesitation, without self-consciousness. Both of ours, because that's what we are, Mrs. Calloway, whether the paperwork says so or not. You're Cooper's grandmother in every way that matters, and I'm his father, and we have both been kept from him by the same person. He held my gaze. Are you ready to know the truth? I thought about the empty birthday table, the untouched good china, the thank you cards I still hadn't been able to throw away. I thought about Cooper's scar and the way he'd started asking Vivian's permission before running to hug me. I thought about the girl in the yearbook photo with the hungry, pressing eyes and the careful architecture she had built around my family like a trap disguised as a home. I took the envelope. The numbers were written in the clean, unforgiving language of science. 99.7% probability of paternity. Daniel Richard Stafford / Cooper James Calloway. I read them 3 times. 4. I turned the page over as though the back might say something different. It didn't. Cooper James Calloway, named for his grandfather, Harold Cooper Calloway, the man who had taught Nathan to use a garden trowel and coached his Little League team and sat in the hospital waiting room for 11 hours when Nathan had his appendix out at age 12. Reading the same 3 magazines over and over because he couldn't concentrate on anything else until his son was out of surgery. Harold Cooper Calloway, who had been gone for 8 years and would never know that the grandson who carried his name was not, in the legal or biological sense, his grandson at all. She told Nathan he came 3 weeks early, I said. My own voice sounded strange to me, distant, like someone speaking in another room. He was worried. Called me from the hospital before she was even fully in labor, said the baby was premature, asked me to pray. He wasn't premature, Daniel said gently. He was exactly on schedule. My schedule. I thought about Nathan in that hospital, his voice on the phone, tight with first father fear and first father wonder at exactly the same time. He's here, Mom. He's small, but he's perfect. He has these hands. You have to see his hands. I had driven to that hospital in the middle of the night and stood at the nursery window and looked at Cooper James Calloway through the glass and felt the specific and overwhelming love that comes from looking at the continuation of everything you've ever built. Nathan had named him after his father. Of course he had. Because Nathan is the kind of man who does things like that, who reaches backward toward the people he's loved and lost and finds ways to carry them forward. It's one of the things I love most about him. And Vivian had known that. She had watched Nathan name his son after his dead father, and she had let it happen and said nothing, because it bound Nathan more completely to a child who wasn't his, and binding Nathan was always the goal. Nathan can never know she let him do that, I said. Name him after Harold. She watched him do it, and she never... I stopped, put the papers down, pressed my hands flat on my knees and breathed. Mrs. Calloway, Daniel said quietly. What do you want to do? I looked up at this man, Daniel Stafford, who had spent 7 years looking for a child he didn't know how to find, who had stood on my porch trembling with the weight of what he was about to say, who had, in the end, come to me, not because I could give him anything, but because he recognized that we had both lost the same thing to the same person. Outside, the rain had started. I could hear it against the kitchen window, steady and purposeful, the kind of October rain that means business. I want to make a phone call, I said, she said. And then I want to make a pot roast. Daniel looked at me carefully. A pot roast? My son is coming home from vacation in 3 days, I said. And when he does, I am going to invite him to dinner. The kind of dinner you cook when what you have to say is too important for a restaurant. I picked up my phone. And this time, I said, everyone is going to show up. I spent the 3 days before Saturday the way I imagine soldiers spend the hours before dawn, quietly, methodically, doing the small physical tasks that keep your hands busy so your mind can stay clear. I washed the good china by hand and dried each piece with the linen cloth Harold's mother had given us. I ironed the white tablecloth again, though it didn't need it. I planted the last of the fall bulbs along the garden fence, pressing each one into the earth with my thumb, thinking about the fact that I was putting things in the ground that wouldn't bloom until I had already done the hardest thing I'd ever done. Daniel and I met twice at the diner on Mercer Street, a quiet booth in the back where the coffee was mediocre, and no one paid attention to anyone else. We went through everything methodically, the order of the documents, the language we would use, the things that needed to be said carefully, and the things that needed to be said plainly. Daniel had a yellow legal pad and took notes in a small, precise handwriting that surprised me somehow. I had expected something larger from him, more urgent. "How do you want to handle it when she tries to redirect?" he asked at our second meeting, turning his coffee cup in circles on the table. "She won't be able to," I said. "Not this time. This time I'm not going to give her the space." He looked at me for a moment. "You've been giving her the space for 7 years." "I know," I said. "I thought I was being gracious. I thought I was keeping the peace." I wrapped both hands around my own cup. I've had a lot of time to think about the difference between keeping the peace and keeping quiet. They're not the same thing. I confused them for a long time. Daniel was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the gray October street. "She's going to try to make Nathan choose," he said. "Between believing her and believing the evidence. She's been preparing him for that choice for years, training him to see you as unreliable, as someone who creates problems. She's going to use that. I know. Are you ready for the possibility that he might, at least initially, choose her?" I said it for him. "Yes, I've thought about that. I've thought about it a great deal." I met his eyes. "But Daniel, the alternative is saying nothing, watching her finish what she started, watching my son spend the next 10 years being slowly stripped of every relationship he has until there's nothing left except her." I shook my head. A mother who stays quiet to protect her own comfort is not protecting her son. She's just protecting herself. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen and wrote something on the legal pad, tore the page off, and slid it across the table. It was his phone number. I already had it, but this was a different gesture. Not the businesslike exchange of contact information. This was something more like, "I'm in this with you, all the way." "Saturday," he said. "Saturday," I agreed. Nathan called Friday evening to confirm. 6 o'clock still good, Mom?" "Perfect. I'm making pot roast." "Oh, man." A genuine warmth in his voice, the uncomplicated kind, the kind that made my chest ache with how much I loved him and how afraid I was of what the next 24 hours might cost both of us. "The kids are going to be so excited. Cooper's been asking about you, actually. Said he wanted to show you his swimming." I closed my eyes briefly. "Cooper's been asking about you." Meaning even Vivian's careful management of his affections hadn't entirely erased me. He still remembered. 7 years old and he still reached. "I can't wait to see him," I said, and meant it with my whole heart. After I hung up, I stood at the kitchen window for a long time watching the last of the evening light leave the garden. The chrysanthemums along the fence were holding up beautifully despite the cold snap earlier in the week. Sturdy, stubborn, orange and gold against the gray October ground. "Beautiful things are worth the effort," Harold used to say. "I know," I said aloud, to no one, to the empty kitchen, to the man I had loved for 33 years who wasn't there anymore. "I know they are." They arrived at 6 o'clock exactly. This was Vivian's way. Punctuality is a form of control. Arrive on time, establish the terms, never give the other person the advantage of watching you come up the walk. I had noticed this years ago and filed it under personality quirk without understanding what it meant. I understood it now. I heard the car doors before the doorbell. Cooper first, his voice carrying across the front yard. Something about how Grandma Dorothy's house always smelled like apples. Did I think she made pie? Then Lily's more careful footsteps on the porch steps, deliberate and small. The doorbell rang and I took one breath, smoothed my hands on my apron, and opened the door. Cooper came through it first the way he always had. Like weather, like something you can't stop once it's in motion. He was wearing a striped shirt and his good sneakers, the ones with the Velcro straps he could do himself now, and his face when he saw me was so open and unguarded and simply glad that I had to work hard to keep my expression steady. "Grandma Dorothy!" He threw himself at me and I caught him, this 7-year-old boy with Harold's name and Daniel Stafford's eyes, and I held him for a moment longer than usual. "We brought dessert. It's from the bakery with the bear on the window. Daddy let us pick." "That's the best kind," I said into his hair. Lily came next, slower, with the solemnity of a 5-year-old who has decided that maturity means moving carefully through the world. She was holding a small bunch of yellow daisies in both hands, the stems wrapped in the paper cone from a grocery store flower bin. "These are for you," she said, holding them out with great ceremony. "Daddy said yellow is your favorite color." I knelt down to take them from her and pulled her gently into a hug. She let me. No hesitation, no sideways glance at her mother for permission. Just a small girl with her father's gray eyes leaning into the hug the way children do when they're not afraid of it. "They're absolutely perfect," I said. "Thank you, sweetheart." Over Lily's shoulder, I saw Vivian watching. She was wearing a cream-colored dress, softer than her usual style, more deliberately innocent, the kind of choice a woman makes when she wants to project harmlessness. Her hair was down, her makeup understated. She looked like the picture of a devoted wife and mother, someone incapable of a calculating thought in her life. She had dressed for this dinner the way a lawyer dresses for a jury. "Dorothy." Her smile was warm, precisely warm. "Something smells incredible." "Pot roast," I said pleasantly. "Nathan's favorite. Come in." Nathan kissed my cheek. He looked tired in a way the vacation hadn't quite erased. New lines around his eyes, a slight hollowness that wasn't there 2 years ago. He'd lost weight, not dramatically, but enough that his collar sat differently than it used to. "You look wonderful, Mom," he said. "You look like you could use about a week of proper sleep," I said, and he laughed, surprised, the real laugh he used to have before everything got so carefully managed. Vivian's eyes moved around my living room as she came in, and I recognized the inventory she was taking, the arrangement of furniture, what was on the surfaces, what had changed since her last visit, what might be evidence of anything. 7 years of watching her, and I had called it being observant, had called it interested in her surroundings. I called it what it was now, standing in my own doorway and watching her case my home like a woman who is always calculating her position. The manila folder was on the kitchen counter, under a dish towel. She didn't notice it. Not yet. Dinner was, from the outside, a perfectly ordinary family meal. Cooper ate half his pot roast and negotiated for extra bread. Lily arranged her green beans into a pattern on her plate that she claimed was a flower, and that bore no resemblance to any flower I had ever seen. Nathan talked about a project at work, something about a structural assessment on a downtown building, the kind of conversation he used to have with me regularly and that had gradually, over the past several years, become rare. I listened. I asked questions. I let the meal be what it needed to be on the surface while underneath. I stayed very still and very focused, the way you stay focused when you're about to do something that cannot be undone. I noticed the moments Vivian redirected. When Cooper started telling a story. "On the boat, Daddy said we should call Grandma Dorothy, and I said yes, but then we—" Vivian touched his hand and said very gently, "Finish your dinner, baby." And the story stopped. When Lily asked why I hadn't come on the trip with them, Vivian answered before I could. "Grandma Dorothy likes staying home, sweetheart. She has her garden," said with complete warmth, said in the tone of someone describing a charming personality quirk rather than a deliberate exclusion. I watched Nathan absorb these small corrections without noticing they were corrections. This was what 7 years looked like from the inside. Not dramatic, not cruel in any obvious way. Just a constant, gentle pressure, applied so consistently that the person being shaped no longer felt it as pressure at all. He had come to see me the way Vivian needed him to see me, with fondness and a mild, habitual concern, the way you feel about something beloved but increasingly peripheral. After the children finished eating, I suggested they go play in the living room. Vivian moved immediately. "We should probably think about heading out soon, actually. School night, and we'd like to keep the routine. This won't take long," I said. Something passed across her face. Not quite fear, not yet. More like a recalibration, a woman adjusting her grip on something she senses is becoming slippery. "Of course," she said, and smiled. When Cooper and Lily were settled in the living room with their toys, I walked back to the kitchen and picked up the manila folder. I sat down at my end of the table. Nathan was looking at me with an expression I recognized. The particular attentive concern of a son who can tell his mother has something important to say and isn't sure whether to be worried. Vivian sat very straight, her hands folded on the table, her face composed in an expression of pleasant readiness. She was good at this. I gave her that. Right up until the end. She was extraordinarily good at this. "I want to talk about honesty," I said. "About family. About the importance of knowing who we really are and where we really come from." Vivian tilted her head slightly. "That's a little philosophical for a Saturday dinner, Dorothy." "Is it?" I opened the folder. "I don't think so." I placed the DNA results on the table between us. One sheet. Clean white paper with the laboratory letterhead at the top, and the numbers below that could not be argued with. Nathan stared at it the way you stare at something when your brain is receiving information your understanding hasn't caught up to yet. "These are the results of a paternity test," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could. "For Cooper." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I have ever heard. "A paternity test," Nathan repeated. His voice had dropped to almost nothing. "Mom, why would you? The test shows that you are not Cooper's biological father." I said it gently and I said it plainly, because there was no way to make it gentle enough, and the only kindness left available to me was clarity. "There is a 99.7% probability that his biological father is a man named Daniel Stafford." Vivian stood up. Her chair scraped against the floor with a sound like something tearing. "This is absolutely insane, Dorothy. I don't know what you think you're doing, but—" "Sit down, Victoria." Her real name. 2 words. I had been saving them, and I watched them land. She went very still. All the performance, the warmth, the composure, the practiced expressions, dropped away for one unguarded second, and what was underneath was raw and cornered and afraid. She took 1 step backward, her hand going to the back of her chair. Nathan looked between us. "Victoria?" I pulled out the investigator's report, the marriage certificates, the photograph from the Nevada DMV. I laid them on the table one by one, the way you lay down cards you've been holding for a long time. "Your wife's real name is Victoria Draper. She's 34 years old, not 31. She was married twice before she met you, once in Nevada, once in Oregon. Both marriages lasted under 2 years and ended with her receiving significant financial settlements." Nathan's hands were on the table now, pressed flat against the wood, as though he needed to feel something solid. "She was involved with Daniel Stafford before she met you, Nathan. She left him when she was 2 months pregnant with his child. She needed a father for that baby before he was born. Someone stable, someone who wouldn't ask too many questions." I held my son's eyes. "She found you." "That is not—" Vivian started. "Cooper was born 7 months after you two met," I said. "You thought he came 3 weeks early. He didn't. He was born exactly on Daniel Stafford's timeline." Nathan picked up the DNA results. I watched his face as he read the numbers, watched the color leave it by degrees, like light going out of a room at the end of the day, slow and then all at once. "He named him," Nathan said very quietly. "I named him after Dad." The words fell into the room and lay there. I had promised myself I would not cry at this table. I came very close to breaking that promise. "I know, sweetheart," I said. She watched me name him after Dad. His voice was still quiet, but there was something underneath it now, a structural sound, something load-bearing beginning to give way. She heard me say, "She was there when I said, and she never—" "Nathan!" Vivian's voice had changed. The warmth was gone. What was left was more honest and in its way more frightening. "Listen to me. Everything I did to protect our family." "From what?" Nathan looked at her. "From my mother? The woman who raised me by herself after Dad left? Who worked nights so I could go to college?" His voice was not loud. Controlled anger is quieter than the other kind. "You needed to protect our family from her?" I laid down the last document. The timeline, Cooper's birth date against the date Nathan and Vivian met, against the date Vivian and Daniel's relationship ended. The numbers were simple. They told the story without any help from me. "The cruise," Nathan said suddenly. He was staring at the timeline, but I could tell he wasn't seeing it anymore. He was seeing something else, a calculation, a pattern, the shape of 7 years rearranging itself into something he hadn't known he was living inside. "Your birthday, Mom. That wasn't a coincidence either." It was not a question. Vivian said nothing. "You planned a family vacation on my mother's 65th birthday." Each word deliberate, carefully placed. "You made sure she would be sitting here alone while we were all together somewhere she couldn't reach us." He looked at his wife. "You wanted her to feel that. You wanted to hurt her." "I wanted to protect what we built." "Stop saying that." For the first time, Nathan's voice rose. Not shouting. Nathan was not a man who shouted, but the volume of someone who has reached the edge of a very long patience. "Stop saying you were protecting us. You were protecting yourself. There's a difference, and I think you know there's a difference." From the living room came the sound of Cooper's voice, bright and ordinary, telling Lily something about the rules of a game they were playing, both of them completely unaware. Nathan looked toward the sound. He looked at it for a long time. When he turned back to Vivian, the anger had shifted into something quieter and more devastating. "Did you ever love me?" he asked. "Or was I just—" He stopped, pressed his lips together. "Was I convenient?" The question hung in the room. Vivian, Victoria, stood with her hand on the back of her chair and said nothing. Not because she was choosing her words. I could see the difference. She was not selecting from available responses. There were no available responses. Every tool she possessed, the warmth, the redirection, the carefully calibrated expressions of injured love, had been stripped away by the plain specific weight of that question, and what was left was a woman with nothing to say. The silence was her answer, and Nathan heard it. I watched my son hear it. Watched the last of something leave his face. Not dramatically, not with the performance of a person whose heart is breaking in a movie, but quietly, the way a light you've stopped noticing finally goes out, and the room is simply different than it was a moment before. "Daddy?" Cooper's voice from the living room. "Can we have the bakery cookies now?" Nathan closed his eyes. One tear slid down his cheek. Just one, quickly. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment, then lowered it. "What do I tell them?" he whispered. Not to Vivian, to me. "How do I explain this to them?" I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. "You don't have to explain everything tonight," I said. "Tonight you just have to be their father, which you are, which you have been every single day of Cooper's life." I squeezed his hand. "That doesn't change because of a number on a piece of paper. You chose that boy every day for 7 years. That's not nothing, Nathan. That's everything." He turned his hand over and held mine. "Daniel Stafford," he said after a moment. "Who is he?" "A good man," I said carefully. "A man who spent 7 years looking for his son and who came to me because he recognized what was happening to our family." I paused. "He doesn't want to take Cooper from you. He told me that before he showed me anything else. He wants Cooper to have both of you, if that's possible." Nathan was quiet for a long time, looking at our joined hands. "Is it possible?" he asked. "Something like that? Is it actually possible?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I think it might be worth finding out." Vivian turned toward the door. I looked up at her. Victoria Draper, 34 years old, foster child, 2-time divorcee, architect of 7 years of careful and specific cruelty. And I said her name one last time. "Victoria." She stopped, didn't turn around. "Daniel is not going to disappear this time. You know that." My voice was steady. I had not planned what to say in this moment, and I found that I didn't need to. "And neither am I. If you run with the children, we will find you. If you try to use them to protect yourself from the consequences of this, if you try to hurt them to hurt us, we will stop you." A pause. "Your children are not yours to weaponize. They never were." She walked out of my dining room without a word. I heard her footsteps in the hall, the sound of the front door, a gust of cold October air, and then the click of the latch. From the living room, "Mommy?" Lily's voice, small and uncertain, hearing the door. Nathan stood up. He straightened his shirt. He took one breath, and then another, and then he walked into the living room to be with his children. I sat at my dining room table with Harold's good china and the yellow tulips that were wilting slightly at the edges and the manila folder that had changed everything, and I listened to my son tell his daughter that Mommy had to step out for a bit and that, yes, they could absolutely have the cookies now, and that Grandma Dorothy's house was a very good place to be tonight. He was right about that. It was. 6 months is both a long time and no time at all, depending on what you're measuring. It was long enough for the divorce to be finalized. Victoria Draper, who had 2 previous practice runs at this particular transaction, moved efficiently. She accepted a settlement that gave her financial stability in exchange for supervised visitation rights she subsequently chose never to exercise. Her lawyer communicated this decision without explanation. She had looked at her children one last time across the terms of a legal document and chosen, as she had always ultimately chosen, herself. I spent a long time trying to feel something about that beyond sadness. I couldn't quite manage it. It was long enough for Cooper and Lily to begin family therapy with a woman named Dr. Reyes, whose office had a sand tray and a fish tank, and who had, according to Cooper, a really good snack drawer. It was long enough for Cooper to stop looking toward the space where his mother used to stand before he spoke to me. long enough for Lily to begin running to greet me at the door instead of waiting to be brought. It was long enough for Daniel Stafford to become Daddy Dave. This had not been planned or negotiated. Cooper had arrived at it himself one afternoon, distinguishing between the two men in his life with the pragmatic creativity of a 7-year-old who sees no reason why a workable system shouldn't be implemented immediately. Nathan was Daddy. Daniel was Daddy Dave. This was the system, and it was not up for discussion. Daniel had cried in my kitchen when I told him about it. He'd turned toward the window and stood there with his shoulders moving for about 30 seconds, and then pulled himself together and asked if I needed help with the onions I was chopping. I told him I didn't need help with the onions. He helped anyway. The Sunday dinner was Lily's idea. She had announced, about 2 months after everything, that she thought the family should eat together every Sunday at Grandma Dorothy's house, because it was the house that smelled like apples, and because the garden had flowers, and because in her 5-year-old assessment of the situation, it feels like the right place. No one had argued with her. It seemed unwise to argue with someone who was so clearly correct. And so it was that on a Sunday in April, 6 months after my 65th birthday, I was standing at my kitchen stove when I heard the front door open and Cooper's voice calling out, "Grandma Dorothy, we brought the bakery cookies again," and the thunder of sneakers on the hallway floor, and I turned from the stove with a dish towel over my shoulder and felt something so simple and so large that I had no word for it except this. This is what I was making room for when I put the good china away. This is what the empty birthday table was clearing space for. Cooper skidded into the kitchen doorway, face flushed, holding the white bakery box. Behind him, Lily walked carefully with her hands cupped around a small bunch of yellow daisies, the grocery store kind in the paper cone, her expression one of enormous responsibility. "These are for you," she said, presenting them with both hands. "I picked them. Daddy Dave let me." "They are absolutely perfect," I said, the same words I'd used every Sunday for the past 6 weeks. And every time I said them, she smiled exactly the same smile, satisfied and certain. "Thank you, baby." Nathan appeared in the doorway behind them, and I looked at my son, really looked at him, the way I had been relearning to look at him since October. He was healthier, the hollowness was gone. The new lines around his eyes were still there, but they sat differently now. No longer the lines of a man under constant low-grade stress, more like the lines of a man who had been through something and was making peace with having survived it. "Is that pot roast?" he said. Cooper put in a special order. "I did," Cooper confirmed, setting the bakery box on the counter with great ceremony. "Same as last week and the week before. It's his signature dish," Daniel said, coming in behind Nathan, a bottle of wine in one hand. He was still careful in my kitchen, still moved like a man who wasn't entirely sure he was allowed to be comfortable here yet. But each week the carefulness diminished slightly, like something thawing at the edges. "How can I help?" "Set the table," I said. "The ivory china, cabinet by the dining room. You know where it is." He did know where it was. He'd put it away twice in the past month without being asked. "On it," he said. Cooper climbed onto the kitchen stool he had claimed as his own and propped his chin in his hands, watching me stir with the particular focused attention he gave to things he found genuinely interesting. "Grandma Dorothy," he said. Can I tell you a secret?" I set my spoon down and turned to give him my full attention, the way I had learned to do again now that there was no one managing the terms of our affection. "Of course you can." He leaned forward and cupped both hands around his mouth in the exaggerated privacy gesture of children everywhere. "I'm glad Daddy Dave came," he whispered. "Now I have the most daddies of anyone in my class. Miles Henderson only has one." I kept my face very still for a moment. Then I pulled him into a hug over the kitchen counter, this 7-year-old boy with Harold's name and Daniel's eyes and Nathan's laugh, and I held him against my shoulder and thought, This is what 70 years of living has been pointing toward, not the easy parts, this. "I'm glad too, sweetheart," I said into his hair. "I'm so glad too." After dinner, after the children had fallen asleep on the living room floor in the boneless total commitment way that only children can sleep, the 3 adults sat around my kitchen table with coffee and the last of the bakery cookies. These were my favorite hours now, the quiet ones, the ones where no one was performing anything. "The divorce was finalized Thursday," Nathan said, turning his cup in his hands. "Official. How do you feel?" He was quiet for a moment. "Relieved. Mostly." He looked across the table to where Cooper and Lily were visible through the doorway, sleeping. "And sad for them. That she chose. That she didn't. He stopped. You don't have to explain it, Daniel said quietly. The two of them had found, over 6 months, a way of being in a room together that was careful and genuine in equal measure. Not friendship yet. Something more complicated and in its way more durable. I stopped trying to understand that particular choice a long time ago. Nathan nodded. Daniel stirred sugar into his coffee. Then he looked up. I've been thinking about something. I want to ask you both. He set his spoon down. I'm considering changing my name, legally. A pause. To Stafford Calloway. The kitchen was very quiet. That way, Daniel said, Tommy and I would share part of a name, but he'd still be Calloway, still connected to your family, your father. He was looking at Nathan. I don't want to erase anything. I want there to be something that says we belong to the same story. Nathan looked at him for a long moment. I watched my son's face, the face I had known for 38 years, that I had watched learn to read and learn to drive and learn to grieve, and now was learning, in real time, to do something I had no word for yet. Something like expanding. Something like making room. He reached across the table and held out his hand. Stafford Calloway, he said. I think that's exactly right. Daniel shook his hand. Neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. Later, after Daniel had carried Cooper to the car and Nathan had buckled Lily in with her rabbit, after the taillights had disappeared around the corner of my street and the house had settled into its nighttime quiet, I stood at the kitchen window with a cup of tea and looked out at the garden. The spring bulbs were coming up, exactly where I'd planted them on that October afternoon, 3 days before the most important dinner of my life. The tulips first, yellow at the edges of the bed, punctual and reliable, keeping the promise the earth had made when the ground was cold, and the work of planting felt like an act of pure faith. My phone buzzed on the counter. Nathan. Thanks for dinner, Mom. The kids want to know if we can do this every Sunday. I told them that was up to you. I smiled and typed back. Every Sunday sounds exactly right. This is what families do. His response came in seconds. Yes, this is what real families do. I set the phone down and looked at the photograph on the kitchen wall, the one from last month's trip to the botanical garden. All 5 of us crowded together in front of the rose arbor. Cooper was on Daniel's shoulders, arms out for balance, grinning the gap-toothed grin that was so specifically, unmistakably, his own. Lily was holding my hand with both of hers, chin tilted up like someone facing into the wind. Nathan stood in the middle with one arm around me and the other loosely around Daniel's shoulder, and he was laughing, fully, completely, without any of the careful management that had lived behind his eyes for so long. We looked like what we were, a family that had been broken apart and put back together in a configuration nobody planned and everybody needed. Not conventional, not simple, not the family I had imagined when Nathan came home from his first date with the woman who would become his wife and told me, with the uncomplicated excitement of a man who hasn't yet learned to be suspicious of his own happiness, that he thought she might be the one. But real, thoroughly, stubbornly, irrevocably real. I thought about Victoria Draper, wherever she was now, spinning a new story, looking for a new family to step into. I thought about the girl in the yearbook photo with the hungry eyes and the desperate want, and I thought, you had this. You had all of it. People who would have loved you without conditions, children who would have grown up and brought you grandchildren, Sunday dinners and yellow tulips and the specific, unrepeatable warmth of people who stay. And you burned it down because staying was the one thing you never learned how to do. I did not hate her. I had tried to hate her and found I couldn't sustain it. What was underneath the effort was something more like grief. For her, strangely, and for the family she might have been part of if the fear in her hadn't always been louder than everything else. I turned off the kitchen light and walked to the foot of the stairs. My house was quiet, but it was the right kind of quiet now. The kind that holds the echo of children and laughter and coffee cups, and the particular warmth of people who have decided, deliberately and together, to keep showing up. I thought about that empty birthday table 6 months ago, the good china, the untouched place cards, the chocolate cake wrapped in plastic and put in the back of the refrigerator because there was no one to share it. I had thought, sitting at the head of that table alone in my navy dress, that I was becoming invisible, that my 65th birthday was the beginning of my erasure, the first chapter of a story in which I gradually ceased to matter to the people I loved most. I was wrong. It was the last chapter of a different story, the one where I stayed quiet and kept the peace, and told myself that gracious was the same as strong. And it was the first page of this one. I climbed the stairs, one hand on the banister Harold had installed the summer he turned 60 because our knees aren't getting younger, Dorothy. This is just practical. Tomorrow was Monday. Cooper had soccer. Lily had her dance class. Daniel would pick up Cooper while Nathan took Lily, and both of them would end up back here for homework and dinner because that was what we did now. That was the shape of our week, the structure we had built out of honesty and hard things and the stubborn refusal to disappear. I turned off the hall light. Beautiful things are worth the effort. Yes, Harold, I know. I went to bed and slept better than I had in 7 years.